Tuesday, March 16th, 2021, meeting of the Advisory Committee to order. This meeting is being held remotely as an alternative means of public access pursuant to an order issued by the Governor of Massachusetts dated March 12, 2020, suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law. You are hereby advised that this meeting and all communications during this meeting may be recorded by the town of Hingham in accordance with the open meeting law. If any participant wishes to record this meeting, please notify the chair at the start of the meeting in accordance with Mass General Laws, Chapter 30A, Section 20F, so that the chair may inform all other participants who said recording. The advisory committee is having this meeting recorded. It will be available on Harbor Media YouTube station as our other meetings have been this year. Is there any participant that is otherwise recording this meeting? If so, could you please identify yourself to myself by name and street address? And I don't see any hands raised virtually or on the screen, so I'll assume there are none. Item 2 on our agenda is questions from the public on items not on the agenda. Is there any member of the public that has a question or comment on something that is not on the agenda? So please raise your hand and identify yourself by name and street address to me. I am not seeing any hands, either virtually or on the screen. So I will assume there are none. So we have 3 warrant article hearings on tonight and potential votes. We've heard all of them before. The first 2 are Articles O and P. And if the liaisons will permit me, I'll provide a brief executive summary of events that have transpired since our last hearing, which is essentially with the questions raised about whether we needed an appropriation or not for Article O. Town council was consulted and indicated that no action would be the appropriate recommendation on Article O because there was no need of an appropriation where the Hingham Municipal Lighting Plant had agreed to fund the full $80,000 that had been requested. And I'll let the liaisons address this in a moment. And with respect to Article P, because Article O contained a more fulsome description of certain aspects of the climate action plan, we thought it was best, with advice of town council and consultation with the liaisons, to basically add that more fulsome description to the recommended motion in Article P. So Brenda or Alan, do you want to add anything to that?
I think in terms of the recommended motions, I think that those are pretty straightforward at this point. I think the question I have for us AdCom conversation afterwards is what other things should we add to the comments? And I know I did get a message from Kathy Reardon from the task force that the name for the Weir River Estuary Park group was slightly misnamed in the Article P, so we can make that change.
Alan, did you want to add anything at this point?
I get only the only other outstanding issue too was the correction of, or how the representative of the light plant was designated. There's also a change from last time.
Would be designated by the light board.
The Hingham Municipal Lighting Plant Board is the legal term. Yes, that was a fun discussion. Yeah. Okay. Not the light commission or the light board. But no, the substantive thing, you agreed, is I think it was important to move the concept of approving the policy concept of having the town officially vote that there should be a climate action plan and sort of what it is, what the goal was.
So turning our attention to Article O then, there are further questions or comments from members of the advisory committee with respect to the content of the comment or the form of the recommended motion. Brenda, I think actually the form of the recommended motion should say that no action be taken on this article.
Thank you. You got Libby.
Libby.
Alan, or is it, sorry, Brenda, you're, oh, right.
Yes. Mhm.
I wondered if it was appropriate. I liked the second paragraph that was in Article P, where it adds beyond, in addition to the Hingham Municipal Lighting Plant funding, it also talks about the fact that therefore there is no need for appropriation of town funds and no action should be required. So I wondered if you wanted to maybe use some of the wording Alan had in that second paragraph of Article P in your first paragraph of Article O.
That's fine by me.
It's just a little more complete, indicating why
Mhm.
why there's no action, which is because the town isn't making an appropriation. And then it also says the article asks the town or asked the town.
Mhm.
Should we say that's kind of past tense? Do we want to say seeks?
Mhm.
Or is it appropriate? I don't know that I've usually seen the past tense like that. That's for, not for you, Brenda, because you're new, but Bob or somebody.
Well, maybe the past tense is appropriate because the article is going away.
Okay,
Um,
however we want to word that.
I will
And then I
say-
didn't know if we wanted to add the word generously. I mean, I don't know. When I read that first sentence, I thought, that the light plant has generously committed to provide. I thought that might be a nice kind of,
It's a good touch.
yeah.
I would be in support of that. I just wasn't sure that that was consistent with AdCom language. So fair enough. Okay.
That's all I have.
Any other members of the advisory committee with comments or questions? I mean, I did think, quite frankly, that we might add a statement to the effect that climate change is the greatest existential threat facing us, but I thought that might be going a little too far. I'm not, Andy, go ahead.
I apologize. I have arrived a little late for this meeting, so I missed the introduction of this articles. And can you just summarize it for me, Bob? I gather the decision is because no funds are involved from the town's treasury that the no action vote is appropriate.
That was the advice of town council.
Okay. Thank you.
Any questions or comments from members of any other town board or committee? I'm not seeing any hands raised. Any questions or comments from any member of the general public? I'm not seeing any either then. So are we ready to vote?
Sorry, but I do have one. Was there any feedback from the moderator?
Let me think. Delving back through 45 emails.
Right. It was the question was raised. Is that an okay procedure to sort of merge?
My memory is we did run it by the moderator,
Yes.
and there was no negative feedback about that approach.
Great.
And it was, of course, cleared with town council. So,
Yes.
and it seems to make perfect sense. So let us hope. So are we,
And just a quick question. The other question was whether the Board of Selectmen would need to revote these articles or whether the explanations that are provided in O and P at this point sort of cover that.
I think the explanations cover that. I don't think the Board of Selectmen see a need to revote this. It's actually our recommendation that is what is before the town meeting. When the selectmen voted, the whole HMLP issue was still somewhat up in the air. So Mary Power actually suggested that they might be willing to remove Article O from the warrant. And so open the warrant, remove Article O and just change Article P. But that didn't seem like it was necessary. And for people that had followed the whole history of this, I think it is a better explanation for them to see the two articles and understand what happened with them. So at this point, are we prepared to vote on Article O? Brenda, you want to make the recommendation?
Voting you that no action be taken on this article.
Is there a second?
Second.
Dave Lee,
Yes, aye. Sorry.
Julie,
Aye.
Evan,
Mug, please.
Sorry, Bob. Aye.
Kristen,
Aye.
Dave Anderson,
Aye.
Nancy.
Aye.
Tina,
Aye.
Brenda,
Aye.
Libby,
Aye.
George,
Aye.
Alan,
Aye.
Victor,
Aye.
Andy. Andy,
Sorry, aye.
Aaron,
Aye.
and I think that's everybody. So thank you, everybody, for your work on that. Thank you, Brenda. A tortuous path to a good result, I think. So we then come to Article P. Are there any comments or questions from members of the advisory committee or suggestions about the comment or recommended motion? Nancy.
I just had a question for Brenda and Alan, and I don't mean to disrupt the apple cart. It's more, I'm just trying to understand. It seems to me one of the biggest users in town from a municipal department standpoint would be the DPW in terms of vehicles and waste reduction, et cetera, et cetera. And it just was interesting to me that they weren't included on the slate of the committee. And I was just wondering, is it just because they would be incorporated in terms of what other boards were doing, or?
I remember in our budget conversation with Randy Sylvester that in fact all the DPW vehicles currently are exempt from all of the carbon reduction things. So again, I think that's a particular department rather than a policy making board. I think the committee members are policy.
Okay, so that was the rationale. Thank you.
And of course, there are two selectmen appointees and two moderator appointees. So that to the extent that a need is seen for a representative of somebody that isn't specifically named, the selectman or the moderator can address that. Andy, is your hand up?
Yeah. Again, my apologies if this was covered earlier. Why is the Ware River Estuary Committee being dropped?
Excuse me. Well, there was the discussion to move it to an odd number for one, as most committees are for voting purposes. And I mean, Brad has spoken clearly to this, but there was a sense that the interests of that committee were represented because there was sort of overlapping. My understanding was there was overlapping participation on some of the other boards. And so that was the sort of easiest or the least impactful group to remove to bring it to the more effective functional level of 11 while maintaining the broad perspectives.
let me just follow up, Bob.
Sure, go ahead.
Shouldn't there be a representative of the water company?
I am agnostic. I don't know if
I think Brad.
I
anything more involved. Does
Brad
Brad want to
may
speak to that?
offer a response.
guess I'd offer the same comment that I just made, Andy, that there are going to be 2 selectmen appointments and 2 moderator appointments. And to the extent that there is a determination that some other segment of our community needs to be represented, there is an ample opportunity for our selectmen, who of course are our water commissioners, to do so. Brad, did you want, oh, wait a minute, let me go to Victor first.
I was just going to also point out, since it's come up a number of times that we appoint town members or employees to these committees. I mean, I don't think we have the ability to direct that an employee join one of these committees. I mean, when in the situations when like the fire chief or the police chief is on a committee, they're ex officio. So I think, you know, whoever mentioned a moment ago that it's the policy making committees, that's or the town volunteer committees, that's where we get the personnel from specific subject matters. And as you say, Bob, the Board of Selectmen and the moderator can always look to fill in other expertise, but it's not from our employees. The employees can serve as resources to provide information, but not sit on the committee.
Good point. David Lean.
I was also going to say, in terms of part of the function of the committee will be to engage with people who have an interest in a perspective. And I think we have to expect and trust that the committee will do that. So it's not a requirement that they have every single person who might have an interest on the committee itself. The idea is the committee will gather that information. So I think that takes care of some of these other committees or interest groups.
Other questions or comments from members of AdCom? Andy?
Yeah, we're looking at the document that Alan sent around today, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you're going to add motion after recommended?
No, we don't usually put motion in.
Okay. And are you going to change the language of one member of the Hingham Municipal Light Plant to the language that appeared in Article O?
I didn't change the wording of the article itself. In the recommended motion, I
No,
did
I'm talking
change
about the recommended motion.
the recommended motion now one member representing the Hingham Municipal Light Plant as designated by the Hingham Municipal Lighting Plant Board.
Okay, I must be looking at an earlier draft. I thought, yeah, I guess I'm looking at an earlier draft, sorry.
Any other questions from members of Advisory Committee?
Brenda, what was the appropriate name of the Estuary Committee?
I believe it's the Weir River Estuary Park
Committee.
What? Say what, Kathy?
Weir River Estuary Park Committee. Just to clarify, that was founded to preserve land around Weir River Estuary. It had a very specific purpose and it has one representative from Hingham. So it seems as though the ecological issues that may have come up can also, they can be consulted, but the Conservation Commission obviously will have a role in it.
And Brad, I saw you had your hand up a moment ago. Is there something you wanted to add?
Everyone else kind of picked up the points that I would have raised. The only thing I will perhaps then add to that is it was always our assumption was always that this Climate Action Planning Committee would be heavily engaged with town administration because we'll need town administration support to conduct the committee's activities. So by the selectmen being also the water board, and by them, town administration, of course, including DPW and every other town body, we feel that those individuals would be appropriately engaged in the process. And then also, as Victor pointed out, we didn't think we could drag them into it anyway. So,
Okay. And any members of the general public that have questions concerning Article P? Or comments? I do not see anybody raising their hand. So are we ready to vote?
Bob, the last sentence in the comment. Should that just be changed to the Board of Selectmen voted unanimously in support of this article?
Well, it's actually referring to the votes on both the articles, which are interrelated, or were interrelated. I think as a general expression of the support of the Board of Selectmen, it's appropriate. It does say it was prior to the identification of the HMLP funding.
All right, then capitalize the article before Article P.
Yep.
Yeah, our editors will
You all over that?
do the sweep up on all of the AdCom pros and form.
Bob,
Libby,
why would we put the vote in that article when there are other articles that have been voted unanimously and we don't put a vote in there? I mean, it seems to me they should all be consistent.
Your editors are likely to change that to unanimously. So.
Is that what gets it? Is that the language, David, in other articles also?
Yes.
But we'll change it so that they're all consistent. But
Thank you.
They-
I mean, these are mine
say-
to edit, so I've already made that note.
and we're glad to have your capable editorial eyes on all of these points.
Please forgive me.
Libby, you're all set at this point?
Yes.
Okay, so are we now ready to vote? Alan, do you want to make the recommended motion?
Recommend that the town vote to establish a climate action planning committee charged with establishing a climate action plan, which will evaluate a wide range of carbon emission reduction strategies and propose measures within the town of Hingham to achieve a zero sum of carbon emissions produced and taken out of the atmosphere, or net zero, by the year 2040 or another target deemed feasible. Said committee shall consist of members as designated herein. I read it all. Is that
And everybody
sufficient?
has the list of members now, I take it.
Should I read it? I'll be happy to read it.
Does anyone want the list of members read? I think we all have it in front of us.
Okay.
Thank you, Alan, for all your work on this. Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
All right, then we come to vote. Daveline,
Aye.
Julie,
Aye.
Evan,
Aye.
Kristen,
Aye.
Dave,
Aye.
Nancy,
Aye.
Tina,
Aye.
Brenda,
Aye.
Libby,
Aye.
George,
Aye.
Alan,
Aye.
Victor,
Aye.
Andy.
Aye.
Did Erin with us?
She went to the BOS meeting, I think.
Okay, all right, didn't want to miss anyone. Victor, I got you?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. All right, thank you all for your work on this. Thank you, Brad, and your committee. Great result for the town of Hingham. And our next
Thank you.
agenda item is Article BB, the citizens petition to amend general bylaws, Articles 2 and 3. I thank Tom Patch for being back with us. I know he had some potential other commitments tonight. I've circulated my comment and recommendation of no action to the committee earlier. And there is only one other issue that we discussed last time that I'd like to bring you up to date on, which is after consultation with town council, he did indicate that if this committee wanted to establish a study committee, that it would be within the scope of our abilities and authority to make such a recommendation. Having reviewed the issues in this matter as the liaison, I would not recommend a study committee. However, I am only one non-voting voice among 15. Any questions or comments from members of the advisory committee? I'm not seeing any hands. Libby, go ahead.
I'm going to lower my hand now so I don't forget. So I think that this article is really well intentioned, and I think there's a lot of appointed and non-appointed volunteers that help our town. And as appointed volunteers on AdCom, excuse me, we know this is a heavy lift, but there's a lot of other volunteers in the community that volunteer in different capacities and spend a lot of time on it. So while I appreciate the intent behind it, I think it would be a lot to try to manage at the exclusion of a lot of other volunteers that help our community. So I just wanted to add that.
Thanks, I agree. And I tried to express our thanks to Tom Patch for the work that he has done on this and the time and energy he's put into it. Any other questions or comments from members of advisory? I don't see any. Any questions or comments from members of the public, including Tom Patch, our proponent? Go ahead, Tom.
Mute this. I'm sorry. I just want to make sure the committee understands that the selectmen didn't seem to believe that referring to a committee was an option before them. I think there was some confusion, and town council has cleared that up. I do also want to point out that even if I hear the concern about the appointed issue, but I'm also hearing some concern about whether or not we can bring the school employees within the purview of this, because there may be some issues of accessing, or the information flowing in from the school department to the town clerk. And so I would point out that this does provide a mechanism for those people to be included without the school department having to provide the information to the clerk, and any of the issues that may be associated with that. And I just want to make the committee aware that I may end up, responding to the comments, concerns about the volunteer issue, which I would respectfully disagree, because again, I'm limiting this to one part of town government, recognizing another part of town government. I hear the concern about other people who are volunteers in non-government capacity, but I'm trying to be more inclusive within the group that I've identified. But I may end up amending the warrant article by motion at town meeting to just to do away with the provision regarding the appointed volunteers. So that would end up just covering the employees, which essentially what we're doing now, and what we're all hearing is the reason why the school people aren't involved is because there's a disconnect in information that can come in to provide or to include those people in the group. And this mechanism would give people the ability to bring those people in obviously not necessarily all of them, but bring the ones in. So I know that's not what you're voting on tonight, but I just wanted to give you a heads up that that's may in fact what I may end up doing.
Okay, thank you. Happy to discuss that with you as the days go on. I will simply observe that a no action vote either tonight or at the town meeting does not foreclose or in any way preclude the town administration or the school administration, for that matter, from seeking appropriate ways to give thanks to people that volunteer. So are we ready to vote? In which case I will make the recommended motion is that no action be taken on this article.
Second.
Right, and then we come to vote. Daveling,
Aye.
Julie,
Aye.
Evan,
Aye.
Kristen.
Aye.
David. Dave,
Aye.
Nancy,
Aye.
Tina,
Aye.
Brenda,
Aye.
Libby,
Aye.
George,
Aye.
Alan,
Aye.
Victor,
Aye.
Andy.
Aye.
And I don't think Aaron has rejoined us yet. Okay, thank you all. Then we come to the next item on our agenda, which is the review, discussion, and potential vote on advisory committee policies and procedures, which we deferred from last Thursday night due to the hour of the evening. Thanks again to Daveling for doing all the work on this and her committee. Has everybody had a chance to review what Daveling memorialized as our thoughts about certain of those policies and procedures?
I have not.
So I did receive a couple of just more grammatical kinds of things. So I have made those changes. And Bob, if you want, I can report on the question we had about minority recorded.
Yes, I'm intrigued about what you're going to tell us about being recorded in opposition.
Because
So-
I gave you a forewarning. So as the committee requested, I reached out to former AdCom chairs. I was able to reach out as far as the mid 1980s, as it turned out. So I talked to John Asher, Donna Smallwood, Lucy Hancock, Laura Burns, Kathy Reardon, who also talked to Bill Reardon. I think that was it. I may have lost somebody in there. No one knows where the provision came from, but it has been in the AdCom policies and procedures since at least the mid 80s. And as people were then thinking about it as to why they thought it existed, everyone seemed to be in agreement, which they weren't talking to one another. They were just talking to me, and I wasn't saying, well, so-and-so said this. So the overall impression was this was created so that the majority of AdCom would not be blindsided at town meeting. So that in the preparation that you would know the minority was going to speak. Everyone thought it was a good idea for the minority to speak if there was that strongly held view. But that it was that allowed the majority to be prepared to respond, that the comment would have both sides because that's what we do in the comment. So it was an interesting, and everyone recounted to me some experience where someone on AdCom had decided they wanted to change their vote on something before town meeting so that they could speak in opposition. And AdCom in every instance that people recalled had refused to reopen the vote and allow that. So it was kind of an interesting discussion in that way. Several people also mentioned that it's helpful for the moderator because he knows then someone is going to speak. And then the final thought that I think that Bob had raised was, well, what if no one was recorded and then no one could speak? And so I raised that with with some of the, I don't think I raised it with everyone, but everyone I raised it with said, well, the liaison could speak as to what the minority's position was, because you would have put that in the comment. So, but no one could remember a situation where that had ever happened either. So I think that's it. I think that's what I told you, Bob. I didn't print out my email, but from my notes here, but it was kind of fun to talk to all these different people.
Well, that's kind of what I remember. And having had that history, it seems like it probably makes sense to leave things where they are. Now, having reviewed this, policies and procedures, some of the changes are, basically bringing them up to date on things like the open meeting law. Other changes are more substantive. If Dave Elaine were to give us an overview of the more substantive ones, do people feel like they would be prepared to vote tonight? And if not, we can defer a vote till a later meeting. Andy, I see your hand up.
I would be prepared to vote upon receiving an overview of the substantive points from Dave Elaine.
Okay, and Nancy, I see your hand up.
I don't know if it's just me, but I still under Article 6 or whatever, bullet 6, I'm not sure what we call it. It's still unclear to me what how we're differentiating a team versus a subcommittee. And the way this reads to me, it's just kind of like the chair decides. And is that, I guess my question is that good enough?
Well, the chair has typically appointed all the liaisons, all the members of ACES, and has designated certain people as chairs in the past. I think in the future, we will refer to those people as team leaders.
So maybe I'm not understanding what I'm reading then. I'm reading it that there are teams and there are subcommittees.
I think that's correct. And I think right now, let's say next year, I think the only actual subcommittee is likely to be ACES. And the other groups will be designated as teams with a team leader to organize the work and communications. And I think Dave Elaine's revision made it clear that teams are not deliberative bodies and as such are not governed by the Massachusetts open meeting law. And we've always done postings for ACES meeting and formal agendas and minutes. And last year when we had the water transition subcommittee, there were formal postings and compliance with the open meeting law with agendas and minutes. Go ahead, Nancy.
I think it might be helpful, just because I know that has been a source of confusion amongst ourselves, is if it spelled out specifically that, I mean, I know you said not, non-deliberative, but if we spelled out that when we're together as a team to discuss budgets with department heads, that, we're not in fact deliberating, we are in fact just gathering information, and that would be a team.
That's why it says gather information.
Okay, and so, well, I guess I'm being more specific, but if no one else is seeing this, then I'm not going to worry about it.
Well, I think you're absolutely right that this gets kicked down the road and there's still a gray area, but Bob's suggestion or analysis seems to make sense. It's a line drawing problem.
Right, and I guess I guess I would like to specifically call out the budget because it's a major component of what we do.
Well, are you still talking about the same section?
In that, yes, 6, 7, in that,
And is there specific language you're proposing?
I guess I would like to call out that, you know, we have 2 at the beginning of every year, which I believe to have always been the case. We gather as groups to look at the budget, and we gather as groups to look at individual warrant articles. And it seems to me that it would make sense that when we're gathering information for the budget purposes, that's a team. But I don't know, and Bob, maybe you don't feel it needs to be that specific.
Well, I mean, it's conceivable as well, I suppose, that teams could be designated as liaisons with respect to warrant articles as well. So for example, Evan and Alan were designated as the liaisons to Article P tonight. And I think, you know, on the warrant articles, especially with new members, sometimes it's beneficial to have several liaisons so they can work together, you know, without being a formal subcommittee.
I think too, Nancy, one thing to think about, ACE is doing budget work as a subcommittee.
Yeah, and it is more, ACES is definitely more deliberative.
Right, but
Yeah.
my point is if we said a team doing budget work, then we're drawing that line in a different different way.
All right.
I mean, I'm happy to entertain any additional language that you think is going to make promote greater clarity. Do people want to take a few days, and if there's additional proposed language, get it to Dave-Aline?
Bob, what if after gathering information, we added for information on budgets, warrants, or other assigned topics for the committee's consideration?
I would have no problem with that.
Or could you say that liaisons to proponents of warrant articles or departments are not considered committees unless expressly so designated by the chair?
That's what a subcommittee is. He does it.
I wouldn't have any problem with that either. It's kind of stating the negative proposition.
Julie's had her hand up for a while.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm trying to look at faces and hands at the side of the screen. Julie.
I'm trying to be good about just raising my hand function. I appreciate Nancy asking questions about this point in the policies and procedures section, because it is for the first time being very specific about how we're forming assignments and groups, and then how it pertains to the open meeting law. So my suggestion would be, especially since there may be some of us in the group who haven't spent a lot of time looking through the language, just to spend a couple more days to review it and give suggested language, and then vote on Thursday. I think it's important enough to not just solve tonight.
We won't be able to vote on Thursday because we can't post in time.
Okay, so
There's
no emergency. We could.
That's right. There's nothing to say we can't even do this after the warrant is completed.
Yeah.
So happy to give people some more time. Dave Anderson, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I guess my one question is whether we could, I guess it kind of depends on what the itch is we're trying to scratch with respect to the subcommittee designation. I certainly appreciate it as it relates to the posting in the minutes. But might we just say that, could the chair at the beginning of every term of AdCom designate at that time expressly, as to Andy's point, these are the subcommittees, of which ACES will likely be a perennial one, and any other one-offs like water was. And everything else, by definition, that's a group of people, will be a team. And at least in that respect, I mean, ultimately it would be the discretion of the chair, I guess, to determine based on these guidelines which is which, but it might at least provide people in the public some sense of why they don't see CPC agendas posted, CPC team agendas posted, but do see ACES agendas posted. That's just a thought.
And I like the fact, Dave, that there's a procedure then, even if it's just at the beginning of every year, that it's determined and public. What is what? I like that.
Evan, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I just to kind of second what Julie said, I think if we're trying to solve, and I'm not sure actually what we're trying to fix right now, but I think it's to ensure that we're always transparent and on the right side of open meeting law. And if that's the case, then I think what Dave just suggested is the right thing to do. And I also think we should probably get the warrant closed and maybe move on to this once we have a little bit less business on the plate, only because I do think, the intent to be compliant with open meeting law is an important one, and we shouldn't rush it.
And Libby.
Yeah, I would just say I agree with Dave as far as outlining at the beginning of the season. And I think the original intent here was that several of us were concerned that if we were getting together, at what point do we trigger the open meeting law? So I think it's a very important point. And I like what George said about adding that additional or any other such matters, because I think that typically our teams are maybe budget teams, warrant article teams. And this year was an example where Daveline and her team were working on this particular issue. So I think that kind of hits all the issues that we were concerned about and what the genesis of what this all was. And I think we kind of have some good solutions, and it sounds like people may just need more time to read it. And I agree that, it's something we can attend to, but we certainly want to get through the warrant.
Okay. I will note, I think the only other really major change related to not supporting candidates. And that appears at the end of the new paragraph 8. Or is it the new paragraph 7? New paragraph 8, I guess. Consistent with this intent, a committee member shall not publicly support or oppose any candidate for any elected town office. So and seeing that we're going to postpone voting on this, I just wanted to flag that one area for you. And we will probably put this on for a meeting in April after we have finished with the warrant and the budgets.
So Bob,
Thanks.
can I ask people who had recommended language, could you just email that to me maybe in the next few days? I know other people, just so I can make sure I've got it where you wanted it to be. Did that make sense? So that I can get it right.
No, I think that makes perfect sense. And maybe, David Lane, rather than just circulating the entire policies and procedures article again, it might make sense to just circulate a redrafted section of it that pertains to those aspects of the.
Or I might go ahead and make the changes and then just highlight what the changes are so people could just read that as opposed to a track changes version. If that would work.
Bob?
Okay. Libby.
I just wanted to add one thing for Daveline for notes, or just the next time we bring this up, is just on that very point that Bob brought up at the end of section 8, is I just want to at some point circle back on the discussion of lawn signs. So, and whether we consider that, if that's considered public support. We discussed last meeting some issues there with spouses with different opinions. So one posts a sign, but if you're single, you can't, you're not in that situation. So does that lawn sign give the impression that everyone in the household supports that particular candidate? So if you could just make a note of that next time we bring it up.
Well, I think that was, I think we did, that was the part of the discussion. So I'm not sure. If you couldn't, we couldn't restrict your spouse from doing something, but
You could try, but you haven't met my spouse. And,
actually I have.
Oh, you maybe you have, Daveline.
So, but, but putting out a lawn sign would be supporting. So you could not do it, but your spouse could. That's what I understood people to be saying last time. So if I'm
just saying, but it's still at your house. So I think nobody knows who put the sign in. So anyway, I know we're moving on.
Okay. Thanks, Daveline. And at this point, we're getting to our ongoing discussions of forecast, financial policy, fund balance overrides, and debt exclusions. And there was a meeting of the forecast group earlier this week. And myself and Julie and Dave and George met with Mary Power and Sue and Carrie Nee and Michelle Ayer this afternoon to go through some scenarios. And in a moment, I'm going to ask Dave to share his screen so that you can see those scenarios that we went through. I want to caution you before those numbers go up that they are going to change, and they may very well be changing substantially. There is going to be a new forecast on Thursday, and there are still developments with the federal legislation and with school funds that will be available. So we are certainly continuing our deliberative process. We're not voting on anything. We're not going to vote the budgets until a week from Thursday. And Dave, do you have access to that budget tool that we've used in the past that basically lists the budgets and the recommended amounts?
I will.
Okay. All right. And Sue, is that something you provide to Dave?
Yes, Dave and I have been already working on it.
Why am I not surprised? Phenomenal. Okay. Now, the selectmen have expressed, or at least one of the selectmen has expressed a view that it would be helpful to the Board of Selectmen to have some idea of the thinking of the advisory committee at this point. So what I would propose to do tonight is perhaps set the table as to different options that are available. I'll let Dave put the finishing touches on the table setting, but it might be helpful and useful to the Board of Selectmen for us each tonight to say if we have a leaning in a certain direction, to say, anybody can say that they totally are on the fence. They don't know what they're going to do. They want to think about it some more. But I think it would be beneficial for us to perhaps each express where our thinking is at this point. So, for example, I think the four principal options that we have to getting to a balanced budget this year are to cut costs, to consider an override, to consider the use of federal funds and/or a combination of federal funds and fund balance, and also to keep in mind what the implications are for the out years in terms of our decision-making process this year and the scenarios that we are likely to face when we get to reasonably final numbers next Thursday. So does what I propose make sense to everybody for this evening?
Bob, just to clarify, what was your third point was federal funds and/or federal funds and fund balance, and what was the fourth option?
Well, the fourth is really, to think about the out years and to think about whether it's going to be whether we'd be able to use federal funds and fund balance to balance the budget in the out years. Option 3 and 4 is really just a combination of federal funds and fund balance. But is everybody okay with that kind of discussion this evening? You know, I'd suggest maybe we each speak our piece and try to not get involved in a debate back and forth until everybody's had a chance to speak. So if we're all agreed on that, Dave, can you share your screen?
Yep.
I made you a co-host.
Thank you, Sue.
Welcome.
Hold on. All right. Okay, can you guys see that Excel sheet now?
Yes, yes.
All right, so let me, again, this is, I deserve no credit for this spreadsheet. This is Mary Powers' good work, and I'm sure with help from Tom and Michelle and Sue. So I will do my best to walk through it and explain it as it was explained to me earlier today. Some of this will look familiar. Some of it's obviously new scenarios. Let me just take it one step at a time and kind of orient folks into what we're looking at here. So you'll recall there have been a number of iterations of the forecast. And if you think back to the documents from 1 or 2 meetings ago, there was a Word document that included some numbers. And what this sensitivity analysis here is basically trying to do is, some people may know that the forecast as it was presented, when we stripped out all of the new additions, including the school recovery budget and the municipal additions, we ended up with a $274,000 surplus. So that's kind of the super baseline, right? That's the stripped down, kind of no messing around balanced budget scenario, or one of them produces a $274,000 surplus. So with this scenario, what we're going to look at here is basically that baseline budget with no additional ads. No, that's redundant, forgive me. No ads. And then what we're going to add to that in this budget is the FY22 budget requests, which total $3.148 million. Now, just a quick aside to Sue. Sue, did you think I was right? Is that 3.148 missing that writing specialist position? Did we ever get any resolution on that?
No, we haven't.
Okay, so Well, as Bob said, add into the pile of things that might change a little bit, the 3148174, which might swing based on a late added FTE to the school budget, which I think may be in there, but it's to be determined. So hang with me on that one.
I think overall in the next few days, we're going to see that number go down.
Okay, like from Bob's lips to God's ears. So there we go. So let's talk a little bit about then what's going on here in the general budget framework. So if we assume for the moment that the 3.148 is added into the 22 expenses, included then, as you'll recall from, if anybody has some of the older budget numbers, they may recognize this number, the 2.367 million, which was a plug number in the original sensitivity for fund balance use, which was to reflect the fund balance use to cover one-time costs in 22. And so this 2797 will not be a familiar number to people because and I'm about to explain to you why, but if anybody has their old sensitivity or even has the latest forecast, you'll see this 2.367817 in there. The 2.367817 is a function of these three numbers at the top. So it's the under projected lost revenue and local receipts due to COVID, or the anticipated, we anticipated to recover in this scenario 100% of the lost amount in FY23. There is the education lost revenue, which relates to Kids in Action, Full Day K, that the school department expects to recover once those programs come back online. And then there is also some non-recurring school expenses that are assumed to be one-time expenses. There are 2 contract counselors, I believe, in elementary. And then there is some money for a strategic plan. And then there is one other item, which is escaping my mind right now. So the sum of those top 3 numbers get you to the 2367817 in orange right here. The new number, which you may recall was a nice development, is some addition. This is existing COVID money, not the new federal money for education. So this $430,000 is under a program called ESSER 2. I forget the actual acronym. Elementary and secondary school emergency recovery, something like that. And so that is money that the school has suggested pumping into the 22 budget to help offset the cost of some of the new additions. So that's where you end up with the 2797, which is to say that all of that money is money that we would not expect to get in future years. And so this would be one time to help close the gap as it relates to that. Now, we obviously know that there are expenses being added in here that are not one time, and we'll get to that question. So that's point number 1. Point number 2 is there is additional one-time money shown here, which speaks to some of the things that we've heard about more recently. So the American Rescue Act, ARA, is the 2.4 million we've heard about related to municipal uses out of the new Biden bill, for lack of a better word. That's estimated, you can see there, to have potentially 50% of it to the town in year 1 and 50% in the second year, with the intent that it's spent by 2024. ESSER 3, which is the third round of this elementary and secondary school funding. Again, these are estimated numbers because it's all a little bit still in pencil and not in ink. But it's estimated that our ESSER 3 allocation for Hingham Public Schools will be 2.2 times the allocation we received in the ESSER 2 round, which gets us to about $946,000. We then look at the excess unassigned fund balance, which is driven off of the most recent fund balance memo. But as we've talked about, that is a moving target as total annual expenditures move. And as Sue correctly points out, it's a function, not a forecast, but of spending. So it's not, this is a number that is backward looking, but it's already changed. So we're doing our best to estimate where that stands. Finally, then the FY21 potential changes to fund balance is the return to our fund balance coffers of the money that the town advanced for legal expenses related to the aquarium purchase, which is being returned to the town out of the proceeds from the bond issuance to purchase the water company. And that was all part of the plan initially. And so the water company as an enterprise fund will pay off that money over time, as it will all of its other borrowings. Any questions on those two buckets first before? All right, let me just slide down here then and talk to you quickly about this. Now, this is my reading of someone else's phone conversation or email with somebody else. So this is all subject to change as well. We're trying to get our head around what the available and allowable uses for the American Rescue Act funding is. And this is as reported as it stands today from the Massachusetts Taxpayers Foundation. So you can read these. I won't read them to you. You can see where they stand. How that all exactly plays in to our budget is going to be a work in process. And as Sue correctly pointed out, you know, we obviously live in an audited environment, and I imagine the government will also want to know, the federal government will also want to know where this is spent. So we will, you know, diligently allocate those resources according to the rules, whatever they may be. But we're hopeful, and certainly at least where we sit today, obviously the intent of this funding is to help situations not unlike ours, which a lot of people are in, and trying to find a way to close some gaps. So that's that. So now let me just turn briefly here to some of Bob.
Dave?
Yeah,
Can you go back to that for just a second?
sure.
American Rescue Act, number 2, assistance to essential workers.
Yeah.
That only applies to private employers and not to whatever the town may have paid by way of bonuses or overtime to its own workers for COVID-19 related matters. Is that correct?
I don't know the answer. I think the distinction there in the parenthetical, the premium pay, I think maybe on the municipal side, certainly the grants to private employers is what you're describing. I don't know, Sue, do you know if that was discussed?
I thought Mary said this morning that 2 would not apply to municipality,
Okay.
that 3 would be more to ours, but
Okay.
I'm not sure. We
That's-
haven't been
that's
able
what-
to get all the information, so.
That's my memory as well.
Me too, that Mary said we weren't going to take 2 into account.
Okay. Yep. I remember hearing Mary say that too. And I guess I focus on that premium pay phrase and wondering if that or meant that was 2 different buckets, but good question, Andy. Bottom line is, I guess we don't know for sure just yet. So going back up to the scenarios, just to try to orient people here, and you guys all have this. Bob sent this out earlier today. If you have it in front of you, you might find it easier, and it might be easier also to just kind of reflect on it after I try to orient you on what you're looking at. But in a nutshell, what's outlined in the yellow in all 3 cases is the scenario variables that change across scenarios. What's consistent then across each of the scenarios is going to be obviously the columns going left to right, and then importantly these rows. And what Mary wanted to try to achieve in this is to say, trying to take a look at what I think what's keeping most of us up at night here, which is some of the differentials in the growth rate of expenses historically, and what those are in relation to our projected future revenue growth rate. And that the fact that just by math, mismatches in those 2 expenses create problems, and they create the very definition of a structural deficit if you're growing something at a meaningfully larger percentage than on an expense side than you are on the revenue side. So the 5-year forecast in the warrant, this assumes a 2% growth rate across both municipal and education into the future. And so just to orient people here, this scenario number 1 envisions one-time money of the 2,797. Okay, so the 2.8 million is used as one-time money. Trust me here when I tell you this, if you plug the 2.797 into the sensitivity model, what you'll be left with for a deficit in 2022, again, assuming that we fund everything that's in the requests, is a deficit of 2.874 million, which is then the override amount in scenario 1. So that is to say, what's the deficit in 2022 when we fund everything that we want to do, and we've used the one-time fund balance of 2.797. What do we have to use to plug the hole in terms of a override? And that is the 2.874. So that's what's been plugged into this scenario 1 model. You'll see that just to prove the point about the growth rate and its impact, if we were to do that and plug the hole with that, and you look into the future as you move across in this one line item, you see that the deficits are familiar to people who have looked at these forecasts before. You know, I'm not sure any time in my AdCom career have we had a forecast that had no red in the out years. I mean, there is some understanding that the out years are hard to know, and that revenue growth changes, and that we tend to be conservative on some, appropriately conservative on some assumptions. So this would not be a shock to people, I think, these kind of forecast numbers in the out years. But then again, here is the devil in the details, in that, I mean, maybe the municipal side at 2% is reasonable. Education side growing at 2%, at least with history as a yardstick, is not, I will just tell you personally, I think that's not reasonable in 23 and out. And that's a longer conversation that ACES will have tomorrow and has been having over a number of years.
Dave, can I just say one thing too?
Sure.
On the municipal side, 2% is unrealistic too.
Okay, there you go. I thought it was a stretch.
Tom wanted me to make sure to indicate that 2.25% is also not realistic.
Okay. So we can almost dispense with that, the 5-year forecast line item, man. I mean, if we look at this as the baseline, let's assume that, just for argument's sake. And that's, again, I will point out 2.5 for municipal, like, given what both Sue and Bob just said, is probably at the low end of I'm not even sure it's the low end of comfortable. It's the low end maybe of doable. 2.5% on education, again, as I said, maybe is an aspirational goal, but it's certainly not a goal for 2023, absent some massive adjustments. And so you find yourself in this scenario in some, a fair amount of red ink in relatively short order there in 23 and 24. And it gets worse going forward, thanks to the compounding of some of these expenses going out. And then as we move into what are called FY22 level services and FY23 level services, again, nothing's changed in this scenario in terms of resources. We're still using a $2.87 million override, and we're still just using the existing fund balance that's been suggested. As we get back to a more kind of, again, this is 2.25 for town, which is maybe the low end of where the municipal side would hope to be. 4 for education. Again, we see these numbers quickly growing, and then as you get out into the total over the 4 years, 23, 24, 25, and 26, we're over $17 million. So, I think the takeaway from this scenario is that if you wanted to fund everything, and ACES is having a conversation tomorrow night about what our recommendation will be to this body in terms of the education budget, but if you wanted to fund all that's requested on the municipal and the education side, I think all of us could agree that looking at scenario number 1 as constructed leaves you in a position where you are quickly either making some significant expense reductions in the out years, or you're looking for new revenue in one form or another of some size. Perhaps that's through an override. I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball with respect to growth, but I don't think you're coming up with $3.5 or $5 million of growth in 2 years. I don't see that in the tea leaves. So scenarios 2 and 3 then start to move these with that kind of orientation. Scenario 2 adds additional one-time money to bridge us to 2023. So the concept here then is to say, rather than adding a $2.87 million override in 22 to close the gap, what if we added an additional $2.87 million of one-time of money? Whether that's that's going to have to be a combination, probably of federal funds, maybe a little bit of fund balance, some of the school funds as well that are coming through the ESSER 3 program. But if we could do that, we could get through 2022 with a balanced budget. We could fund everything that is on the table on the municipal and education side today. But then we find ourselves again having really not solved the problem as much as we have pushed it down a year to another AdCom chair to worry about. And we have a problem quickly then in FY23. And we have a problem even under the draconian 2.22% growth across the board scenario, where we've got a gap in 2023 of $3.5 million deficit up to 5 million or 4.8 million under a more familiar and more historically representative growth rate. So clearly the scenario 2 in solving the FY22 problem pushes the problem out a year. Now, having said that, I will just give you my own editorial comment on that, which is to say, and anticipating someone's potential question, which is to say, you could, in scenario 2, combine it with an override then in 23. And so that is a discussion that I will just throw out there and say that that is something that could be discussed.
Dave,
then
Dave,
look, oh, sorry,
Dave, yeah. On scenario 1, the 2.7 is the assumption of federal reimbursement of that number up in the first block. Is that right?
Scenario 1 does not.
Plus fund balance?
Well, yes, I'm sorry, scenario 1 I mean, I guess it depends on what you're talking about. Scenario 1 was kind of envisioned prior to the federal dollars even becoming available, or envisioned, I would say. It was plugged in. It was never, obviously hasn't been voted on. But I'm not sure I understand your question, Andy. Are you saying, is there federal funding in scenario 1?
Yes.
I mean, there could be, certainly.
Other than the ESSER 2?
Well, there could be. I mean, it's a function of where we want to come up with the 2.797. Obviously, the 430 is coming from the federal government through the ESSER 2. The rest of this doesn't have I don't think, Sue, unless I'm wrong, I don't think it has a clear source. It could be fund balance. It could be.
It is fund balance.
Okay, but to Andy's point, it could also be conceivably some ESSER 3 and some American Rescue Act if that was certain, right?
It could.
Right. Is that what you're getting at?
So let me just, a municipality under the CARES Act cannot recover lost revenue, is that it?
That's the CARES Act.
Yeah, okay. Now, Dave, you're gonna have to explain to me tomorrow how a program that's supposed to be run on a break-even basis has $500,000 in lost revenue, which should be made up. I mean, that education lost revenue, I still don't understand why the town makes that up. But if it's the only way to get funds out of fund balance, I suppose I understand it. But this is Kids in Action, after school program, and pre-K.
Full day K, I think, was a large portion of it. Okay.
And those are programs that are supposed to be run on a break-even basis, right?
Yes, but
So,
I think my understanding is that what changed was that the revenue was lost, but the expenses were not. And so the delta is the challenge. So you're right. I mean, whether you call it replacing lost revenue or covering a budget deficit, I guess is two sides of the same coin.
okay.
I want to let Dave finish the presentation, but it may be helpful to think of both fund balance and the federal money as one-time money.
Okay.
Because without raising taxes, The one-time money is that's just what it is. It's one-time money. And the hole gets bigger as time goes on. Go ahead, Dave. Why don't you?
So I'll just quickly finish because scenario 3 is I don't think one anyone's going to be excited about, but it's important to see. So scenario 3 envisions basically 2 years of plugging the hole with one-time monies, and no change in no override, no obviously windfall growth revenue on the school on the Hingham budget, but really just paying operating expenses largely out of our savings, which has the expected consequences, which is you can balance the budget, I suppose, in 22 and 23, but you're left with something that's completely unsustainable in the out years. And as we talked about earlier, you're looking then at a total of, this is the total amount of one-time dollars that would have to be found to plug the 22 and 23 holes. So those are pushing, from 9.2 to $10.5 million. And again, we're looking at sources here of, and we can debate whether these sources are even all available given the rules. So it's, like I said, scenario 3 is useful to see the order of magnitude of cash that would be needed to plug these holes if we chose not to do something significant, either related to, revenue or expenses in the out years. So it's really there more as a bookend to show where it starts to get uncomfortable or beyond uncomfortable.
May I ask Sue a question? How much is the total outstanding debt of the town?
I think it's about 59 million.
Okay.
It's in last year's warrant.
All right, thank you.
And Dave, George, Julie, it may be helpful to talk briefly about some of the implications of the different courses of action. So, for example, one of the choices is, override to balance FY22 versus use one-time money to balance FY22, and then conceivably need to do an override for FY23. Scenario 4 thinks about using one-time money to bridge the gap through FY23, and then having a very substantially higher conceivable override for FY24.
You mean scenario 3, Bob?
Yes, I'm sorry, thank you. That's what I meant, whatever I said. And the folks from the school committee and school administration feel like it would be beneficial to have the opportunity to have the override for FY23, because it gives a sufficient amount of time to give a lot of thought to it, to let them do a strategic plan, which conceivably would allocate resources in a way that is going to better control the growth in the school budget, or at least flatten it out. I don't know if Dave, George, or Julie, you want to mention any other concerns that we talked about?
Well, I think I'll credit this to George because I thought it was an excellent point that he made. And George, correct me if I misstate it, but as I took your point to be an override, this was a cautionary word about an override in this year in 22. I mean, I have some concerns just personally about an override this year where I think it could feel rushed, and I'm sympathetic to the idea of taking our time to get it right if we're going to do something as significant as that. And George made a kind of a corollary point to that, which was that in a year in which the town may receive $3.5 million of federal funds between school and federal assistance, is that a year in which to also ask the town for a tax increase? And I understand that we can see why there are reasons to do that. But I think George was just making the point that optically it might be a little bit odd to ask for a tax increase while at the same time we're getting a kind of a revenue windfall, if you will, albeit very different. One is recurring, one is one time, but just making that point.
I'd like to add something
ahead,
about,
Julie.
Bob, when we talked about scenario 2, and sort of the idea of a revised financial management plan. So in conjunction with going through scenario 2 and possibly laying out the groundwork for an override in fiscal year 23, and I mean an operational override, that there would be meetings between the school side and the municipal side to discuss the efforts to bend the curve of the growth, to monitor both on the school side, their financial planning efforts, and also on the town side. And so it's this override working group, which has been raised before. So I just wanted to point that out, that if that's an option to go with option 2.
And Bob, I would just jump on that also, and looking at option 2, and just to make sure everybody understands. So under option 2 in FY23, we would be looking at an override of about $4.8 million. And I'm looking at the bottom line of expenses at 2.25% and 4%. And that would balance the budget in FY23. But looking forward to FY24, there's a $1.6 million hole. So, and that hole gets filled either with additional revenue, which is substantial revenue is probably unlikely unless we had some major expansion in the South Hingham or something. But that's several years down the road. So there's a $1.6 million hole in 24 that has to be closed somewhere, which really gets us back to, I think, what Dave and Julie and you, Bob, have said is, it's how do we bend that curve to get our expenses in line with revenues, so that at least we're not looking at an override every 1.5 to 2 years. I mean, maybe an override is going to be necessary 3-4 years, in every 3 to 4 years. I don't know that. But I think what we do know is that, at a 4% rate of growth for the schools, and, probably closer to 2.5, 2.75 for the municipal, we don't have enough revenue coming in on a regular basis.
Well, now that we've gone through this preliminary discussion, are people ready to kind of?
You want me to stop sharing, Bob, or keep it up?
You probably don't need to keep it up unless people want to see it. Everybody has it on their own computers.
Good.
Thanks, Dave, as always. If folks are ready to think about which way they might be leaning at this point, we could do it by seniority on the AdCom, in which case I'd ask Victor to lead off.
Well, I've thought that it does make sense to plug things now and take the time to consider an override next year. I do think that doing it this year would be rushed. And while we get at our meetings, and certainly the selectmen get at their meetings, a large group of people who would support the override, we don't really know that it's been socialized across town. I would be, in saying using one-time money to plug this year's hole, sort of, I guess, the scenario 2. I'm not necessarily saying that we go for all of the additional requests. I don't know that those are all things we can afford. I do at this point, and I guess I'll be more informed after I hear ACE's recommendation, but at this point, I am I'm favorably disposed to the idea that we need to fund the recovery budget, if that's the term, for the schools. I am skeptical, again, I'm not sure what the school's plans are, since I'm not on ACE's, for continuing. I mean, the problem is you have this need for recovery and a lot of expenses, most of which are personnel. So you bring people on for a couple of years, I think I've heard. I think the schools need to be prepared to then not continue those people if they're no longer needed. That, I think, could be determined in the planning process that you were describing, Dave was describing. So I think that would all be, I assume, would all be part of that discussion of looking for ways to, use Bob's term, flatten the curve, or Dave's term. On the municipal side, I mean, we always have a number of worthy requests, and we rarely fund all of them. I don't think this is a year we should be looking to fund all of them. So I guess that's a long-winded way of saying, at the moment, I'm in favor of scenario 2, but I'm not convinced that the full amount for level services plus all of the additional requests is the way to go.
Thanks. I do think you're going to see developments in those numbers, Victor. So again, these are still very preliminary numbers subject to development. And Dave, I think you and Erin need to wrestle for the next speaking spot.
That's Erin's if she wants it.
Definitely me. There was a rock, paper, scissors that occurred behind the screen. I think I'm still very focused, and my mind is still very oriented towards the fact that I truly believe, and I am actively living the challenges of getting kids back, and the deficits that I see both in my own children and were represented by Dr. Lebewa's presentation. So I would find it very difficult to do anything other than support that full funding request, because it's, I think it's important for everyone to really understand that we're talking about math tutors and English tutors. So that being said, I think that I'm in agreement. I think if I forget which option it was, but I'm in agreement that I think it might make sense to think about this in a 3-year, 5-year window instead of thinking about it in a 1-year window. So to me, that means, what resources do we have at our disposal this year? I understand that some of the recovery funding does have some out year to it. It does go out to 25, but there's no saying how much money we'll actually get. So I think that if I were, again, I reserve the right to change my mind, but if from where I am right now, I think it makes sense to inject from one-time sources this year with a very strong, and I know we can't compel next year to do anything, but I think it would be quite short-sighted for us to not couple that with a very concerted effort for an override for the following year, just to ensure that we aren't, thinking, in a short-term fashion. I like to say, my daughter will graduate in 2028. So, this is just, it's very personal to me. So the idea that this is a short-term, this can't be a short-term solution, I guess, is my summation.
Thanks, Aaron. Dave?
Well, yeah, I think Aaron and Victor both put it very well. Just to add a couple of new thoughts, I guess I would second the notion that it's, to me, scenario 2 is the one that deserves my greatest consideration and support at the moment, even setting aside the dollar amounts, because I think that the framework to me just makes more sense. I have a long list of concerns about trying to get an override done this year, not the least of which is just the amount of time it would take. I just can't imagine doing something so substantial. And I'm not blaming anybody, it's nobody's fault, but it's March 15th. It doesn't strike me as reasonable to do the job that needs to be done to make the case for something like that between now and town meeting in any reasonable fashion. And given that we have a potential windfall to get us through 22, even if we all have to kind of hold our nose and spend against some recurring expenses with some one-time dollars, I think the benefits far outweigh the costs in terms of taking the time to consider if an override is necessary, and if it is, what's the right amount to make sure that we address the needs across this entire town, not just in 1 or 2 departments. And secondly, just as a final thought, I guess I would say it seems like 100 years ago that I did that presentation about the relative tax rates in Hingham and our peer communities. And I didn't do it with any preconceived notion about what I was going to find. But what I wanted to explore was, what is Hingham's tax burden? What is the residents of Hingham's tax burden vis-a-vis our peer communities? And in so doing, I just wanted to understand the context in which the potential for an override, whether this year or next year or any year, would be framed. And so everybody can draw their own conclusion about those charts. I've drawn mine, but I think it's worth looking at and worth thinking about that. And I think that, sometime when we can get back in the snug for a beer and have a philosophical conversation around the benefits of Prop 2.5 and trying to run an enterprise at 2.5% revenue growth when expenses grow at least that, we can debate the public policy benefits, but it is what it is. It's the hand we've been dealt and we have to deal with it. So that's my thought for the moment.
Julie?
Thanks, Bob. I've changed my mind so many times on this topic. It's difficult, but now with the latest information of the federal funding, it's hard. I guess I lean most towards option 2 at the moment, because it's hard to justify at this time that we have these funds coming in, and the idea of doing an override with that funding coming in, but also not having the planning to back it up. I'm really in favor of the idea of making a plan. I do feel like we've reached the end of the road, being able to get by each year with the revenue that's been coming in. There are expenses that and needs both on the school side and the revenue side, on the municipal side. But anyway, I favor option 2 at this time. I think that the schools should get the full amount of what they're requesting. I think that they demonstrated, and we are all aware of what they're up against, have been up against, and need to recover for the kids. I do think that some of the municipal requests for this year are important, but I agree with Victor that maybe there's some things that this isn't the year for. But I do think that on the town side, there are definitely some needs. And again, I'm just in favor of course, this is going to be my problem next year, but the idea of doing the planning that is needed to get some adjustments in budgets, perhaps hopefully curb the growth on some areas, and come forward with a better plan. Thank you.
And while I don't expect to vote on this, My thinking has gone towards option 2 as well. I think earlier in my thinking, I was giving a lot of reference to adherence to our financial policy, which I think is important. But I think there may be a new definition of one time. And I think for a lot of the reasons that have already been expressed, that I think that using one-time money this year to bridge our way to FY23 is the way to go. And Nancy, I think you may be next in the pecking order.
I think we got George and Libby.
George, you are right. You are right.
And Evan. You skipped a year.
Has Evan been on that long?
I have, Bob.
Libby, why don't you go ahead?
I guess for the sake of time and not sort of repeating some of the same arguments people have given, I feel as though I lean towards scenario 2. I think that Victor made some excellent points about the fact that, and I think, we've all kind of echoed those, that we have, this may not be the year for some of those additional town administrator recommendations. I think I'll be very interested in the years following the recovery, which I know ACES still has to make their recommendation on the budget. So I sort of defer a, I guess, statement about the school budget until we hear the formal ACES recommendation. But I do think we need to look at, what the out years would hold for some of those positions, and whether those, if they are filling a temporary need, then we reassess those and reconsider if those positions still need to be there. I think that I might have even stated earlier at a meeting that, this may be an override maybe in our future, but I think we need to take the time to really do the planning and really, I think with the one-time money we have coming in this year and the use of fund balance that is within the current uses that we have right now are within our financial policy, the 2 million, whatever it is, 367 is within the policy. And I think that we should definitely continue those discussions, but I think it would be really rushed for this town meeting. And I think we have the one-time money, and it's probably, seems to me there's no more appropriate use for it than in fiscal 22. And then we can get in earnest to start really reevaluating how we can make this budget work for the future. So that's my opinion.
George?
Well, I'll make it unanimous and say that, I'm leaning towards number 2 also. And for all of the reasons that everybody before me has already so eloquently put, I will not take any more time from our meeting tonight. So I will just go for 2 and pass the baton to Evan.
Evan.
Well, I know no one's ever heard me say anything like this before, but I agree with everything that's been said. And I think Victor's kind of starting point was a really strong one. I do like option 2 for the reasons that have been stated. And I like it because it gives us time to be more thoughtful and plan, because I think, as some others, I think Julie said, it's clear we can't kind of kick the can down the road any longer and need to look at the needs for both the schools, which I think they've done a commendable job at putting together, why they need what they need in this recovery budget. But I also, even though some who have maybe tuned in think that I'm only about the schools, I do listen every year to the things that go on in this town and do see that there are some significant needs on the municipal side that I would love to have the next, 12 to 14 months to put together a plan that kind of gets, the town with a right-sized operational budget to avoid having to, as I think Bob or Dave might have said, having to do an override every 18 months. So I won't take any more time, but appreciate option 2 and all of the kind of thinking that's gone into that scenario.
Nancy?
Thanks, Bob. I would like to say, like Julie, my thinking on this has swung dramatically through this whole process. And the last February, I was very ready and fairly vocal on the fact that it was time for an operational override. And I didn't come to that lightly. I've always appreciated the fiscal conservativeness of the town. I think that our financial policy is strong and appropriate, and I think the town is strong because of our financial policy. So I'm reluctant to veer wildly outside of that. But I also think that, I believe strongly in the one time and how we traditionally look at fund balance. But I also keep in mind that, we also refer to it occasionally as our rainy day fund. And I sometimes don't disagree with that term because everyone's definition of raining is different. But I think clearly this year is, if it was ever raining, this year it's raining. But then, as luck would have it, or, good management or whatever, we also have one-time money coming in. So I would feel really uncomfortable with doubling down on those sources. I think it's more appropriate that we use a little bit this year. And as Evan said, really dig deep into the plan to make sure that we've got a plan that's sustainable going forward. And so I like the rest of, like everybody is, I'm feeling more comfortable with scenario 2. And Dave, I'll probably give you a call in the morning because I do have some questions. Just the little bit I've been able to play with this of kind of really understanding how that out years are affected. And I'd like to say to everybody, a huge thank you for the hard work that's been put into all the tools and all the information that's been provided us to come to this, because this is a big decision for the town, and I wouldn't want to get to a point where we would take overrides lightly. And we know we've got some coming up for capital needs, and I wouldn't want to get into a situation where we consider them overly often for operational needs as well.
Daveline?
I want to see your mug, so I'll. I think like everyone else, I don't have a whole lot to say here. Option 2 seems to make the most sense to me, partially because I think for what Victor said and others, it doesn't make sense when federal money is coming in to not use it and sort of move us to next year, I guess, in that sense. I support the recovery budget for the schools, but I want to say, as some of you have indicated, it's a recovery budget, which means it should be recovering at some point. And it's so I don't see that as permanent. And so I'm really sort of urging caution that for some of these extra positions, presumably you would reach a point that those positions are not needed. And so I think that's important to keep in mind, because I too think there are needs on the municipal side. And I've said before, the town doesn't exist just for the schools. Schools are very important, but so is the police department, the fire department, and other kinds of things. So, so I think as we look to the future, we also have to look at how do we, in fact, get cost more under control. And so some of those things, I think, one of the things we talked, I think last year with Dr. Austin, that once he got a chance to sort of be here and learn the lay of the land, and then of course the pandemic and the land changed. But what in the school department is no longer perhaps working and could be changed. And I think, we've seen a lot of things that Tom Mayo has done, taken opportunities like with the engineering department and now with community planning to sort of reconfigure how to do things in a way that is cost effective. And I think the schools need to do that as well. So although I support the full funding of the recovery budget, I don't see that as a budget that's tacked on forever more. And so I think we have to look at ways in which we can look at that cost issue. But I think, I think the municipal side is pretty lean, and I think the school committee and the school department has made a convincing case for what's needed in the recovery budget. So.
Thanks, Steve. Andy?
Picking up on Dave Elaine's point, I would just say that a major part of the school, well, I'll tell you that where I'm going to come out on this. I'm going to come out on being on the fence. But following up on Dave Elaine's point, 32 full-time equivalents, hiring 32 full-time equivalents for the school department next year. I think there is zero chance that in 2 or 3 years, those people are going to be leaving. From what I have heard, and I will confess to not understanding it yet. I'm hoping Dave Anderson can explain to me, and maybe tomorrow night I'll understand it. But a lot of the new hires are, we're told, not simply for recovery efforts, but to make up historic, what's the word I'm looking for? So historic gaps, I guess, in learning. And frankly, I don't see the historic gaps. So I guess I have to understand that better, but I really don't expect the school budget to change much in the future. I think their budget was, what, 5.6% level funded, and 8-something% with the additional requests. So I have a lot of homework to do, I believe, to fully understand the school budget yet. But as I said, in response to Dave Elaine's thought, I don't think you're going to see 32 full-time positions disappear in 2 or 3 years. There are a lot of things in the school budget I don't quite understand. You've heard me say, if once, 1,000 times, these revolving funds that the school has mesmerized me to the point that, well, I don't understand for the life of me how these break-even programs produce these enormous reserves, but yet the reserves can apparently not be touched. But that's probably more my lack of understanding than anything else. So I want to hear more on that. Perhaps Dave can explain that to me as well. There are some expenses there I don't understand. It looks like the full-day kindergarten have increased expenses from 1 year to the next of 100% expenditures. And there are a lot of things in the budget I don't understand. So I'll apologize in advance for not being able to convey much information with regard to that, because as a member of the subcommittee, I'm supposed to have some understanding of that. So that's one of the reasons that I'm on the fence on this whole thing. Obviously, just looking at the numbers, the out years are just terrifying. I frankly am just scratching my head about that. I don't know quite what to do. The brightest picture in town, unfortunately, is the fund balance, but every time we go reach for that, Sue wraps our knuckles with a ruler, so we don't ever get too much of it. But the reason I asked what the debt was, I mean, if the total debt is 59 million and your fund balance is in excess of 30 million, I mean, that's quite a impressive reserve, it strikes me. So that unless everybody in the town is a Republican, that you might even say is it's a pretty excessive reserve to debt. And I don't know how the rate agencies look at everything, but boy, if you had half what you owed in the bank, I think you'd be entitled to a pretty good rate on your next borrowing. So I need to be educated a little bit more on that as well. So I think I'm on the fence. I have to understand the school budget better. I think the municipal side has pared their numbers pretty dramatically in the last couple of years, frankly. I think it's a very lean operation to the point of probably not providing some of the services that I think taxpayers in Hingham probably are entitled to. The numbers, well, and so the numbers as you look at it, demand and override, whether there's anything behind the numbers that can help us, I don't know. If we have to find out what is behind those numbers, even if we go for a one-time, I mean, even if we take full advantage of the one-time expenditures because of the deficits that are pending in the future.
Okay, thank you. Brenda?
As sort of the newest member of AdCom, this is my sort of first intense look at the town's budget. And, at this point, I think I mostly have observations, which is the out years, definitely, I agree, look terrifying. And it seems like we definitely need to do something to address that. Seems likely that an override will be in our future, but I'm very aware that as a person that doesn't currently have a family member in the schools, whereas I did for many years, I'm not up on all the details around the schools. So I think of myself as somebody representing some of the rest of the town right now. And I don't think people are ready to understand and act on an override this quickly. So option 2 is the one that makes sense, that gives us a chance to understand it and be able to explain it more fully, and gives a chance for a lot of other people in town to come to understand it as well.
So thanks, Tina.
Everyone has done such a great job. I agree with everyone, just, in some ways. I think right now, scenario 2 looks the most appealing. I don't think it looks appealing in the out years, and I am concerned about going to town meeting next year. I want to make sure that we have kind of educated at town meeting about what's coming, because we're creating a structural deficit that we're going to have to fund. And I think that's kind of, I agree that it would be it feels rushed to put an override into this year's town meeting, but we are automatically creating one for next year, the same year that we're going to be asking for some big capital projects, which are going to also require tax increases for us to fund. So while right now, scenario 2 seems like the wisest option, I just want to make sure that, we're going to have a heck of an override subcommittee, understanding what things are going to look like and what we're going to be asking of people in the next years.
Thank you. Kristen?
Agree with everyone. I think these different scenarios, again, keep me up at night, and I think about them all day long, trying to think of the best way to handle all this. I definitely think, like everyone said, an override is coming. This year is rushed, and just looking at those forecast tools, it's gonna have to happen at a certain point. But again, it still needs to pass at a town meeting for an override to happen. So we need to educate people going forward that this is coming. I think this year, again, like I said, it's rushed, and I think using one-time money this year plus an override isn't going to get us anywhere in another year. We would be up for override again. So this year, the amount would be smaller and we would be looking at an override again in like another year or two. So I think we need to take the time and look at it and get the amount right for future years. But like Tina said, look at it and start educating people and, you know, not looking at it at this time of year next year.
Alan, I saved the last word for you.
I agree that option 2 is the most constructive structure. Save you my speech.
Okay. I don't propose further discussion for the advisory committee tonight on this because I think things are going to change. I think they're going to change in a good direction. I think the sharing of our views tonight, while certainly not final, has been educational and instructive for all of us. And it should save us some time in our budget deliberations a week from Thursday. Priya Howell has her hand up. I'll entertain questions or comments from members of the public.
Hi, Priya Howell, 26 Del Pret. I just wanted to say that I appreciate this incredibly thoughtful discussion. And I'm really grateful to everyone on this committee for being willing to give your time so willingly. Beginning a budget conversation at 8 p.m. With that dense spreadsheet is definitely no easy task. And although I've been an outspoken advocate for an override, I think the most important thing is funding the school department's recovery budget. And, you know, I've been looking, like today, the town of Belmont is in the process of trying to pursue an override. They have a very sophisticated website, a lot of information. They've had, you know, debates about it. I definitely think we would be playing catch up and not be ready to give the override the advocacy that it needs so that it passes not just at town meeting, but at the ballot. So I do appreciate that this committee is leaning towards scenario 2. I think scenario 2 is a great option. I just hope that, as others have said, we will start the discussion for an override sooner rather than later, because while this is the recovery budget, it is absolutely essential for our kids to recover. I don't think that these needs are going to go away in the next 1 or 2 or even 3 years. And if enrollment continues to increase, it may never go away. So I hope we won't be in the same position next year and finding ourselves again, you know, behind the 8 ball, and that we'll start the conversations about the override, or really never stop having the conversations about the override, so we can be better positioned for next year. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the general public that have a comment or a question? Julie, you've got your hand up.
I just want to note that the discussion process has on the budget has gone on for a long time, and there have been so many changing facts and strategies. So I feel that next year it would never be rushed. We would have time to think about it. The situation we have found ourselves in this year, and then hoping for federal money, and then finally getting word of it. I'm glad that we've had the time to figure things out and not make a decision back in January or February when we didn't have the information. So I just wanted to put that out there. Thank you.
And Mr. Mangorian, could you identify yourself by name and address, please? Glenn Mangorian? I see your hand up. I don't hear anything. Joshua Ross, could you identify yourself by name and address, please?
Sure. Joshua Ross, 125 Wampatuck Road. Jumped in here to give Glenn an extra second to see if he get his computer working. I guess I mean, I have a lot to say, and I appreciate everyone, all the discussion, because it's not it's not common to have a discussion with all members of a board usually because it takes so long over a specific topic. So I really do appreciate it. So I'll just ask a general question. What would be the role of AdCom for an override process? Would the committee be actively involved in this? You know, we haven't done one in so long. I don't know if there's really a playbook. I'm just curious on, you know, on your role to get people on board. If so, the AdCom agrees that that's the case. That's it for now.
Well, let me try a quick answer to that at this point. The selectmen, of course, are the ones that determine whether an override goes on the ballot or not. In order for an override to go on the ballot, if you took a look at the warrant from 2009, you will see, for example, that at the end of Article 6, there is essentially a contingent budget that is proposed so that if approved by the town meeting, amounts would be added to specific departments. The advisory committee would need to vote on such a contingent budget and either recommend it or modify it or not recommend it. So the advisory committee would play that role in the event that, say, next year, there is going to be an override. As one of our members has suggested, perhaps it would make sense to have an override subcommittee of the advisory committee, just as we had a water transition subcommittee, and just as we have ACEs to work hard throughout next year to participate in community meetings, to do education as to why an override makes sense or what aspects of an override make sense. And I think the advisory committee would play all those roles and would seek to inform the selectmen and work with the schools to have an override presentation that made sense for the whole town.
Thank you.
Probably that's the best we can do right now.
I understand.
Mr. Mangorian, I saw you're back. I don't know if you're communicating now or not. You're on mute, it looks like. Mr. Mangorian, did you want to speak? I'm sorry, I'm still not hearing anything. If your technology problems get solved, we'll.
Or he can call in. Bob, can you give him the call-in number if his computer's not working?
Well, his hand is down.
His hand is down. I'm not hearing anything. And this won't be the last time we talk about this.
I could thank him for his letter, which you forwarded to us.
Yes, I do thank Mr. Mangorian for his letter. I thank everybody else who wrote many, many letters, almost universally in support of funding the schools and in support of the climate action plan. Those seem to have generated the most correspondence to the advisory committee. And I will continue to forward all letters that are sent to the advisory committee onto all members.
Let me just note that, Bob, if I could interrupt, the call-in number for this meeting is 929-205-6099. So if anybody is having trouble with his or her computer, dial in at 929-205-6099. Sorry to interrupt, Bob.
Okay, well, I think we should go on to our next agenda item, which is review and approval of minutes from the meeting of March 9th, 2021.
If I could, I was a little late in getting the minutes out. to the committee members, and I got a couple of edits late this evening, have not really had a chance to put them into any kind of a red line version. So if it's okay with everybody, I will put them into a red line version, send them out tomorrow, and we can review and approve them on Thursday. Alternately, I can try reading through them, but
Well, we probably have to do it next Tuesday because we can't post in time for Thursday.
okay,
That shouldn't be a problem. Next Tuesday will be fine.
okay.
And warrant articles updates. I know there was something I wanted to mention to folks.
Erin's got her hand up.
Erin, go ahead.
Thanks. I was on the Board of Selectmen call for a portion of this meeting, and the HMLP article regarding the substation, the Board of Selectmen voted no action.
Okay. And is HMLP intending to go ahead with the article?
There was no discussion to that end during the Board of Selectmen meeting. However, my first call tomorrow morning will be to Paul to find out his intention.
Okay. Well, we have that posted for Thursday night. So if you'd let me know, Aaron, if Paul still intends to come to the AdCom, that would be great.
Yep.
Sue, I actually had a question for you on the salaries of town officers. Now that we got rid of George's salary, are the selectmen going to modify theirs?
I do not believe they are.
I understand that was on for a hearing tonight, but then was taken off. We have it on for Thursday.
I think they do. The personnel board, I don't think could make it tonight.
Oh, I see.
Those,
So we have both the report of the personnel board and salaries of town officers on for Thursday. Does that mean we're going to need to defer those?
Yeah, I think you're
that was
gonna
my
have to.
understanding, talking with Ms. Campbell.
Okay. All right, so we may have a more abbreviated night on Thursday. Okay, and I know Dave Aline's going to get to us with the gender neutral language Thursday night.
I should send out that comment and recommendation tomorrow. I'm just waiting to hear back from town council on one point.
Okay, all right. And are there liaison reports tonight?
Alan has his hand up.
Sorry, I was just trying to lower it. I was going to bring up the personnel board thing. Sorry.
Okay, and Victor, the one remaining, is there just one remaining planning board article?
They voted Monday.
They voted, the planning board did.
The planning board did. So there will be two articles.
So AAA.
The flood article that we discussed, and Andy, if you want to give a summary, since the ADU is your article.
The triple D detached accessory dwelling units, the board, the planning board expressed that they would not support the citizens petition, but would likely make a motion to sort of amend the petition into a request for a study committee. So the planning board's position is that they would like to have the town meeting establish a study committee to look at the question of detached accessory dwelling units, just as the town had a study committee that spent considerable time a few years ago to look at the question of permitting attached accessory dwelling units. So I've got to lean on Victor's expertise to tell me how to draft that comment and what the whether the recommended motion would be a substitute motion or what.
Well, the planning board will have their, yeah, it's interesting. Planning board will have their recommended motion, but the, I mean, it's up to us to come up with whatever our recommended motion is, right? Whether
Right.
it's action or study committee or something else, or to support the citizens petition.
Yeah.
Does Ray Estes support the study committee?
I don't know that we know at this point. He raised the question of what would be the consequence of withdrawing his petition, and it was pointed out to him that actually that would be there would be a negative consequence in that if that went away, there would be no infrastructure for the town meeting to attach onto a request for a study committee. So I suspect that I don't think he would oppose the study committee request, but I don't know that. I'm waiting to hear from Susan Murphy, who had drafted the materials on which the planning board acted, but there were some word changes in what was drafted. So I'll get a hold of that and then I'll massage that and work with Victor and get something to the committee. I don't, that's not going to happen before Thursday. I don't believe.
This Thursday.
Yeah.
So can we put those planning board articles on for a hearing and vote next Tuesday?
I think so. Victor, you think so?
I think that's doable.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, if there's a problem, I can let you know promptly. I'll find out tomorrow, but I agree with Victor. It's doable Tuesday.
Okay. And I see that Mr. Mangorian is back with us. If your technological issues have been resolved, we'd be happy to hear from you. Don't want to deny you the ability to speak because of a technological glitch. So if you could just identify yourself by name and address, that'd be great.
Can you hear me now?
We can.
Oh, I'm sorry for the first technological Zoom problem I've had. Glenn Mangurian, 4 Huckleberry Hill Lane. And let me start by just thanking all of you for the tireless hours that you put in on behalf of all of us in Hingham. I'm a 35-year resident of Hingham, and I have a couple of comments to make. I think you should be cognizant of decisions you make this year in their impact on next year. And I'm particularly drawn to next fall's special town meeting around the Foster School. And I think the last thing I would want and any of you would want would be to jeopardize the vote of approval for the bond issue. It's likely you're going to have to borrow $100 million, and that's going to require a 2/3 vote, but it's not going to kick in for another 2 years. And think about an override in the spring of somewhere between $3.5 and $4 million, and then going and asking for a bond issue of $100 million that will have an impact of maybe $7 million of increase expenses. So as you deliberate and as you think about it, please think about not jeopardizing what the risk factors are and how many times you can ask the taxpayers. I am 110% in favor of the Foster School, the public safety building, and supporting our children. That's one comment. The second comment is, although I'm a retired senior partner in a business consulting firm, I know that a strategic plan, unless it's directed to do so, will not reduce costs. It will likely tee up a whole new set of things to be done over 5 years. And then the third thing, to build on what Andy McElhaney said, is the 32 positions are requested as recurring positions. And the likelihood that you will have them voluntarily reduced is very, very slight. So think about the overrides that you're going to need. And at some point in time, the possibility is that you'll have a revolt of the taxpayers. And none of us want that. None of us want a divided town. We should all be aligned on our things. So that's just some food for your thought. And I really appreciate, again, all the time and effort that you put in, not only you, but all the volunteers in town, because our town would not operate without the volunteers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I see Anita Pixel has her hand up. Anita, was there a comment or question you wanted to make?
Yes, my name is Anita Ryan, 37 Baker Hill Drive. Just wanted to thank everyone for taking the time and looking at this issue so thoroughly and working so hard and diligently for all the factors of our community. I just wanted to point out, as you already know, that there's an overwhelming amount of support for the school budget and also increases for our schools funding, and coupled with that, tax increases. I think we've all recognized that what we pay towards our school, what our tax base is on the lower end of the spectrum. And I respectfully disagree with the comments about a tax revolt. I actually think we have been underpaying when you compare against the services and the demands that our community is asking for. And I just ask you to consider the number of participants in these meetings who've encouraged advisory committee to look at what we're spending and how we can increase it so that we can fully fund our schools. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. All right, I think we are down to meeting times. We'll be meeting Thursday night. We'll be meeting next Tuesday night, and we'll be voting the budget a week from Thursday night. The selectmen are expected to vote the budget on Tuesday night. And we're going to have forecast group meetings, as I understand it, on Thursday and Friday. I understand ACES is meeting tomorrow. Dave, when do you think you'd like to present your ACES recommendation to the full AdCom?
Well, if we vote, we're on the agenda for a potential vote tomorrow. I don't know where the committee is going to come out. If we voted it tomorrow, I don't know why we couldn't do it Tuesday.
Okay.
But if we don't vote it tomorrow, then I'm just trying to think. If we don't vote it tomorrow, if we have to book another meeting, is the soonest meeting we could have would be Monday. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah. So if we were to not vote tomorrow, take some more time, meet on Monday. I mean, we could still recommend on Tuesday if that's. You tell me. If you want us to recommend Tuesday, we'll make it a.
You could post tomorrow for a meeting on Friday, but the posting would be before your meeting tomorrow night.
Yeah, I think we'd be better off in the forecast group meetings. I think I'd almost wait to Monday and just see if we get any more info.
I think that makes a lot of sense.
So, but if you want us to plan on a recommendation on Tuesday, we can certainly work against that deadline.
I can always put it on the agenda, and if it makes sense to hold it till Thursday night, we can put it on the agenda for Thursday as well.
That's fine with me.
I understand that basically the warrant has to go to the printer on April 2nd. I think that we need to have all our articles in, I think by March 30th or 31st. I think the town moderator gets a chance to review them before they go in. So if people have got warrant articles in the editing pipeline, please get them on the way so we can do the final review and get them into the town administrator's office.
You got Aaron and Julie asking questions with their hand raised.
Oh, thank you. Aaron, go ahead.
Just going back quickly to the vote for ACEs or the recommendation then to the broader AdCom group. When there are still moving targets in terms of revenue sources, federal or otherwise, is there a methodology to do that when there's still moving pieces? Or how does that piece work for the bigger board if we don't know what the revenue piece looks like?
I don't know if I have a definite answer for you today. I think as we get better information about the federal funds, one possibility, I suppose, and maybe Sue can weigh in on this, is if we vote one-time money in the form of fund balance to close the gap, could we then, to the extent that federal funds become available, spend those funds and essentially end up with a surplus at the end of FY22, which would flow its way back to fund balance? I mean, obviously, we want to spend as many federal dollars as we can. Do you want to modify that at all, Sue?
I think you said it pretty well. I mean, there are too many moving pieces to definitely say, but I think ACEs can vote on a budget. I think then it will be up to AdCom on how to fund it.
Okay. I can
And
see, yeah, okay.
Julie, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, just two quick things. When your article has been voted, if you can try to wrap it up and send it to your editor, but can you CC me? Because I'm just trying to make sure that I see where everything is and update the WAS. And I'm going to be doing that more often. So I sent an email out today to some people asking questions. But anyway, just keep an eye on that we need to track the articles and really get them to your editors, and then so we can get them to the Sharon Perfetti in the Board of Selectmen's office. The other thing that I wanted to ask, Bob, is that should you have the liaisons to the committees that have and the municipal budget, Tom Mayo's recommended extra budget requests. Just make sure that for our vote on the budget next week or leading up to it, that they can explain or advocate if there are any additional positions to leave in the budget.
Okay, so what Julie's talking about is we're basically going to go budget by budget through Article 6 on Thursday night. And to the extent that you made a recommendation earlier in the year, you should review that recommendation, kick the tires one last time. If all of a sudden you find a gaping piece of expense that shouldn't be there, feel free to speak up. I don't think you're going to do that, at least on the municipal budgets. I think as someone said earlier tonight, they're pretty lean. The additional requests on the municipal side will be considered as we have in the past. So we can take a look at those and decide on what ones we feel should be funded this year or not funded this year. And at the end of the process, we can vote on an overall budget and our view as to a funding means. We should have the input from the Board of Selectmen by that time. So just as we knew their budget recommendation last year before we voted, we will know their budget recommendation this year before we vote. And that triggered, there is one final budget that we have to review, which is the community planning budget. And in talking with Tom today, Victor, I asked about a hearing on that. And he said, well, you essentially had the hearing because that's what I had to say about the community planning budget is what I said with my town administrator recommendations last week. So
no expenses then in the department.
So I told him that I would communicate with you about whether we should have Tom back to present the community planning budget. If we need him back, we may have to do some careful scheduling because he's got meetings on all the same nights that we do.
Well, I think he, in terms of personnel, he did describe what his proposal, right? In terms of expenses, I haven't looked at it for a while, but my recollection is they're fairly flat. So I don't know that we really need them.
Sue, do you have budget sheets for the new community planning budget?
Yeah, well, I have it in the town administrative recommendation Excel spreadsheet. I don't think I have it in Munis yet, but I could do that tomorrow.
If you could do that and get it to Victor, and why don't I put it on for Tuesday night, Victor?
Sure.
With the idea that you and Sue can do the presentation, and unless you feel we want to have Tom
No,
back.
I think that's fine. Although you may want to ask Tom when you speak to him tomorrow, whether he is changing any of the expense line items in that budget.
Okay, well, we'll have our Wednesday call. And Sue and Julie, remind me to ask that question if I forget to. All right.
Hey, Bob, can I ask one warrant article question?
Yes, I'm sorry, Dave. I saw your hand was up.
That's all right. Just to remind you, I'm sure you and Julie are on top of this, but I can't finalize I don't know how to finalize Article U yet in the PRS windows with the dollar amount missing. And so I don't know if there's any wisdom as to how we're going to, if that's going to be a supplement or what we're going to do about that.
Well, based on what John Ferris said the other day, it would seem to me it's going to have to be a supplement.
So there's no, I guess the only other thing that occurred to me is that we would never consider, I'm not advocating, just asking, some kind of not to exceed amount in the article, or is it just better to wait?
Well, I suppose you could pick a not to exceed amount like $10 million, but.
Well, we could probably do better than that. I'm just asking if it makes a difference. If we're going to have a supplement, we're going to have a supplement. I don't really care. I didn't know if there was a workaround.
Well, we also might have a supplemental because we might have to initiate the transfer from the reserve fund.
Right.
All right. So as we sit here today, then I should not worry about the comment for the purposes of the warrant.
I think you can. I think when we've had this before, we have had a comment in the printed warrant But when it comes to the recommendation, we've said that the advisory committee will make its recommendation at the town meeting.
We can say that, but I guess I would also then in the body of the comment would say that we don't know the cost.
I think that's right.
Okay.
I think that's probably how we should proceed unless
Okay.
someone
Why
has.
don't I'll tweak it that way and then I'll get it in and we can edit it if we need to. Thanks.
Okay, good. And I was wondering whether there was some way we could vote the concept without the amount, but I don't know if that makes any sense. So we'd probably have to have a meeting shortly before the town meeting.
Well, we do anyway every year.
Right.
Is that what the selectmen did though? Did they vote it without the dollar? I thought I heard they voted without the dollar amount.
They voted it without the dollar amount. But we
that
have
wouldn't-
to make a recommendation as to, and we need to have the dollar amount to comply with the MSBA requirements.
Got it.
So, all right, are there any matters not anticipated within 48 hours of the meeting?
My wife routinely votes budget recommendations and concepts without a month and just puts them in later. So I think that's not hard to do.
Was that on the agenda?
She's a dear woman.
No, there was that was under the items that
The
they've just come up in the
24
last 48 hours.
I certainly didn't anticipate that. Anything else? I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second, is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Kristen,
Aye.
Dave. Dina,
Aye.
Brenda,
Aye.
George,
Aye.
Victor,
Aye.
Julie,
Aye.
Eveline,
Aye.
Evan,
Aye.
Nancy,
Aye.
Aaron,
Aye.
Alan.
Aye.
Andy
Aye.
and Libby.
Aye.